Welcome back to Ritual Hobby and Art. Today I'm out on the trail at Norris Lake, TVA, the Songbird Trail. It's not really about hiking or walking, it's really more about painting. When you do a walk, maybe you can't plein air, but you see things. You see trees and flowers and scenes that you want to do a painting of. So you take a photograph, and when you sit down to do the painting, you have to remember how you felt, what you saw, and sometimes what you paint does not look exactly like the photograph because you're trying to hold on to some sort of a image that you saw. So we're going to look at that today. Here are just a few examples. This is from a trail here near where I live. And then the next one is from a city park, the Knoxville City Park. But they don't all have to be in parks or in the woods. This next one is the city of Raleigh, just right downtown Raleigh, the Briggs hardware store. Sometimes you find yourself in the mountains or by the beach, Myrtle Beach. This is with the storm in the background and really conveying what I saw, what I felt that evening with what was going on. So join me on the trail. I'll find some scenes. You'll see them too. I'm going to do a painting, and we'll see how they come out and how they convey what I saw compared to what you might see as I go and paint the trail. The materials that I'm using includes this mixed media pad by Master's Touch, which is a Hobby Lobby brand. And, the paper is durable, it's strong, but this is not watercolor paper. It's not a watercolor booklet or anything like that. So it doesn't have the thick paper, and so I always have a piece of watercolor paper behind it to sort of protect the page, the next page if I'm going to paint. But this has worked very well for me. It does crinkle the paper, but I always flatten it with a wood block or something like that. I'm using the gouache paint set, another Master's Touch. This is not a promotion for Hobby Lobby, that's just what I'm using here. So these are the paints that I use for this. It's the same paints that I use for plein air or use in my coloring books if you have seen any of those videos. And then for paintbrushes, these are most of the paintbrushes that I'm using on this particular project. So you've got two round brushes. This is a 10, this is a 6. Then I have a detail brush, just a very thin brush. And then this is a Matthew Palmer Tree and Texture brush. This is the small one. He sells 3 sizes. I have all 3, but for the size of the paper that I'm working on with the size of the pictures, this is fine. And so this is how I'm achieving most of the tree and bushes in my paintings. So not much working with, and let's see how I do in the paintings. Starting out, I passed through a sort of a stick forest that has nice patterned trees probably laid out in a certain planned order. And then I move on to what I call a more mature forest with trees laid out differently, more randomly. And so in this mature forest, I like the way that the path goes between the trees and the shadows that are cast from the trees and just the general look of it. So let's start with a look of this scene here and the painting that I did. So in this scene, we've got 2 or 3 trees to the left of the path and a lot of them to the right. But as you see in my painting, I didn't capture the ones to the right in the same way, really focusing more on the ones to the left, because that's really, I think, what my mind's eye captured when it looked at this scene. Starting out, I wetted the page and really focused on capturing the trees or the tree foliage landscape of the background. And so I did that. You can see where the dark paint had been wet. I used a palette knife to make sort of some indications of tree trunks It's a watercolor technique, but for this purpose, it wasn't going to remain the tree trunks. It was more of marking their location for a future technique. And I laid out the path the way I kind of saw where it wanted to be, and in the distance you can see the ridge or the mountain ridge that would be in the background. I've used those palette knife scratches to sort of indicate where I wanted to put the trunks of the distant trees. And then, of course, I've gone in and painted the trunks for the trees here. Now you can tell the ones to the left are arranged or spaced a certain way. The ones to the right I didn't space as well as is seen in the photograph. And that's a good point of where your mind's eye, what you think you saw, wasn't exactly, even though I was working off of a photo, I think in this case I was really focused on those left trees and not the right trees. And so they kind of jumbled together, focusing mainly on the one that's closest to the viewer. Because gouache paint works the way it does, when you apply white to any other color, it really is very opaque and stands out. And so I went ahead and painted the white onto these trees because, of course, white is very visible on the original, on the trees themselves. And so I just went ahead and put that layer down. Now, sometimes the white gouache will mix with the color that's already there, as you see in the tree closest to the viewer. Some of that brown has mixed in, and that's okay. It kind of helps add to the flavor of the scene. At this point, you probably noticed that I've added some color to the ground, especially in the background, darker green under the trees, the distant trees, as well as a little more green to the foreground. I've got some sort of plant growth at the base of the three trees to the left, plus obviously leaves in the trees themselves. And I've added the shadows. And as I've mentioned before in some of my plein air videos, I find doing shadows kind of challenging. Do I do them in a dark color? Do I do them in a color like the grass, a darker green, or the pavement, a darker purple or gray? So that's something I'm still working out. Obviously this is a learning process. So continue doing that. And so here's the finale of that picture. And as I said, these are not really, trying to do big, beautiful paintings. This is really just capturing what I saw when I walked on the trail. And so you do see that I have added a little more detail to the trees, tried to work out the shadows a little better, and added a little more green to the field or to the ground. So that's that one finished. And so Norris Dam, this is the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. And so Norris Dam was built in 1936. It was the first major project for the Tennessee Valley Authority, bringing hydroelectric power and also controlling flooding in the Tennessee Valley area. So here's a nice view of it, just in front of the ridge, between a bunch of trees in sort of the foreground or center ground, and trees in the sort of the background with grass in the middle. Starting out, as on the other one, I paint the sky and the ridge in the background, trees to the right and trees to the left. Notice I have left a space in the middle. I've done the horizon and the grass in coming towards the viewer, but that space in the middle I've left blank for the dam itself, as that will be sort of the feature of this painting, at least in my mind's eye. That's really what the focus is for me. Everything else will just be clutter, background, or additional. Now I'm going ahead and painted the sort of the figure, the shape of the dam in. Did it in sort of a purple, grayish purple color. And I'll of course work on that a little more as I go. A little more detail to the dam. A little more. You can see the bridge that cars can drive over this bridge. I've driven over it several times because there's this path, the Songbird path, and then there's another one on the other side of the river bluff. And so you drive over this bridge to get to it. Bridge, dam, it's all the same thing. But you could see the lines of the lines of the dam, the slope, and the tower. It's all starting to take shape. At this point, there's a lot more definition in the dam, some shadowing, and shadowing under the trees, and that will continue to unfold. So here's the final on this one. I would say that, so you have the dam is finished, and the shadow has been embellished a little more. I really wanted to bring out more of the color of the grass, and but it was a very sunny day, and there wasn't a lot of texture other than the tracks where the lawn tractor had been. But I didn't really want to emphasize that too much. So I mean, you do have some of the perspective of the lines, but otherwise, I did a little more detail in the trees. So as you turn the corner here, there's a sort of this obelisk-shaped object up ahead. Sort of a, what is that thing? Well, apparently it was used for measuring the current of the river, and there's a little door at the top, but it's from a time gone by, still remaining. And for me, it's, I think, something that I might want to paint, something interesting. Here's a closer look at this sort of structure. You can see a lot more detail to it, including the door at the top. And so the picture that I'm going to use for this is slightly different. We'll look at that now. So starting out, I actually did this painting before I did the other two. Even though this is further on the trail, I was more interested in this one. So I started this one first. And so I've got I've painted the sky and the trees of the ridge, the lighter trees closer to the water itself. It's a sort of a dark greenish, brownish kind of color, and then, greenery around, and the pillar itself. And put down some a gray with some white paint to sort of give it some appearance. And add in some of the vines and the small trees that are located right next to it. So at this point in the painting, based on the first photo that I used, if you look at it in landscape form, this tall pillar looks kind of like a tombstone or like an outhouse or something. But in the actual picture, it's more of the picture was taken in portrait instead of in landscape. And so you really have to think about it as being this part with maybe less of the sky. And so more emphasis on the background and the pillar. So at this point, I've put in some of the small bushes and trees and other foliage or material. And so what I need to do now is start adding leaves. So using the tree and texture brush, the Matthew Palmer brush, I'm going to go ahead and add some of that foliage. You don't want to have too much water in the brush, or else you kind of get this sloppy mess. And there's so much foliage that you're really going to have to do this several times, or I'm going to have to do this several times to really get it in, using some different textures and different tones. At this point, I'm just, instead of mixing with a round brush, I'm just going to start mixing with this actual tree and texture brush. And that original photo did not show nice little branches. It was just more like vines. I mean, there are trees here, but it was really more of vines that was crawling around this thing. So you're just dealing with a dense amount of green. But, again, different colors of that green. So, and because this is water soluble, you can work right over it and kind of blend it together a little better. There we go. I'm really just establishing this sort of green. So if you do get a blob on the paper, you can kind of go back over and flush that out a little bit. Wouldn't be able to do that maybe necessarily with acrylic, and maybe not even watercolor. Just depends on what you're using. And I mean, it could look like a mess, I suppose, but again, we're sort of getting that feeling of just a lot of green stuff going on here. And some over here on these vines as well. Just kind of want to. I will say that this tree and texture brush does take a little practice. Probably I need more myself, but I just couldn't find a brush like this with the bristles splayed out like that here in the States, and so I bought this from Matthew Palmer's website. I had seen him use it on plenty of tutorials, and I thought that was just a great way of getting leaves, or leaves of any kind, really. And you want some of these to get right in front of the pillar, because the pillar was certainly behind all this stuff. It wasn't just standing out on its own. It was behind a lot of other plant material. So I'm just kind of working this all in. That's certainly looks a lot better. Looks a lot more like what I remembered when I went on my walk. Water in that one, so just kind of, there we go, just keep working that. And you don't necessarily have to have a brush like this. This is just, I think before I had this brush, I kind of used some craft brushes for this effect. But I like the way this works. It may have some sort of a sable material in it, and that might be why it works as well as it does. The brush is really wet, so I really need to. And of course, you want to change the color of your leaves from time to time, because of course not all of these bushes and trees are the same. They don't catch the light the same. There's just a lot of considerations to think about. But for me, this is looking a lot more like what I sort of envisioned. So you can still see the trees in the background on the other side of the river. You can see the river itself, the pillar, and then all this stuff around it. And so that's it for this time, and I'll see you next time out on the trail.